Daf Yomi sponsor for the week is sponsored by Rabbi Aaron and Evelyn Kislasi in honor of the engagement of the daughter Alana to Joy Brescher of Los Angeles. Daf Yomi sponsored by Yehuda Greenwood, B'schus Refuah Shlema from Mercedes Bas Miriam, and Daf Yomi is sponsored by the Kahal Yereim Daf Yomi crew, Li'ilui Nishmas Bela Yentel Bas Elchonon. Nom Sham Shahav and Aliyah. Makkos over 12 lines up from the bottom, 19a 3. Okay, Makkos over. What is this position that we were discussing, according to, was it Rabbi Yossi? Well, it was in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, it was Rabbi Shmuel's position. Rabbi Shmuel had said, was asking about whether Bisman Hazeh nowadays, whether we can bring Meiser up to Yerushalayim, the tithe up to Yerushalayim and eat it there. And he said, well, you see that you can't bring the Bechor Korban, you can't bring these other sacrifices, therefore you can't bring Meiser. That was what the discussion is. So now we want to know, what is the position that he's holding? What is the status of Yerushalayim now that the Beis HaMikdash does not exist? Maybe the perspective might be that when the holiness of Yerushalayim was established, it was established for all generations. And therefore it retains its existence status, the status that it had back when the Beis HaMikdash was present, and it had a special holy status, so that you could eat your Meiser Sheni within that area. So maybe it retains that status. So then Afilu B'chor Nami. Then what would be the problem about bringing firstborn sacrifices? Now, we're going to say, well, there's no Beis HaMikdash. The answer is that really we don't need a Beis HaMikdash to bring a korban. To bring a korban, all you need is an altar. And the reason why we don't bring sacrifices nowadays, we could theoretically bring a korban Pesach or something like that, even though there's no Beis HaMikdash. The reason is we don't know exactly where that Mizbeach should be.
Is that what we do? Is that why we do? Some people do korbanos before Shacharis?
Well, you can always say them, right? But you can't do them. You can't actually go to Yerushalayim and do them, right? Because there's no location. You can't know exactly where it is. But other than that, according to this opinion, that the Yerushalayim maintains its status of holiness, the existence of the Beis HaMikdash is not the relevant factor. Maybe he holds that the holiness was established at that time, but once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, then it's not holy anymore. The holiness is one is dependent on the other. So then, if that is the case, so then Afilu B'chor Nami Tibois, he should also be asking the question about the firstborn, the sacrifice there as well. So Amar Ravina says, Li'olam Kasavar Kitchel Shasa V'lo Kitchel Asad Lavo. He holds that the holiness was established at the time, but not forever. So what was we discussed that the case was that the sacrifice was made, and then it became obligated because the Beis HaMikdash was still around, and then the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed before they actually were able to eat the sacrifice. The sacrifice became valid based on the fact that they sprinkled it and it was valid. So therefore, Vadayin B'saro Kayim, and the meat is still around because the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed that day. Right, it's kind of an interesting case, right? The Beis HaMikdash happened to be destroyed that day. Umakshinan B'saro Ledamo, and what's happening is we are going to make what's called a hekesh, a comparison between the blood and the meat. Madamo b'mizbeach, just like the blood needs an altar in order for you to be, in order for the sacrifice to be given, and we are now holding, according to the side of the opinion that says once the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, the altar does not continue to exist. So af b'saro b'mizbeach. So too, the meat needs to be eaten and consumed when there is a mizbeach around, and there isn't one anymore. Now, then, after we know that, then we know you can't eat the meat anymore. Omakish maser libechor. We're going to then take the next step and say that just like you cannot eat the meat, you so too cannot eat meiser in the tithe in Yerushalayim as well. Now, problem is that this is yet another one of these rules that apply to the way that you derive psukim verses when you're talking about korbanos, and that is v'chidavar halamed behekesh chozer melamed behekesh. A hekesh is when the pasuk, when the verse writes two topics right next to each other in the same verse, you can learn one topic, the rules of one apply to the rules of the second thing. Okay, because that's why they're the juxtaposition. That's the fancy English word for it, right? Since you juxtapose these two topics, the laws are the same. Now, here's what's happening. You're saying that blood is juxtaposed to the meat. So they have the same law. Then you're taking and going, okay, now A goes to B, then B goes to C. And you're saying that just like the tithe is juxtaposed next to the meat, so just like the blood teaches us the meat, that it needs to have the Beis HaMikdash around in order to eat it, in order to be able to eat the meat, just like the blood needs to be brought with when the Beis HaMikdash is around, so too, then I'm going to go from B to C and say that I also need a Beis HaMikdash around in order to be able to eat the tithe as well. So that's how we're going from A to B to B to C. It's like a train, right? So now the only problem is, can you do that, right? Because when that comes, can you go from one hekesh to another hekesh? The rule is that when you're learning about sacrifices that you can't do that. You cannot do that. You can do that with other laws, right? If they don't have to do with sacrifices. But once you're dealing in sacrifices, you cannot go from A to B to B to C. Okay? And so, therefore, v'chidavar alame behekesh chozer malame behekesh. Can you take an item and go make the juxtaposition from A to B, and then further make the juxtaposition from B to C? But we would say like this: Maser dagon. So the answer is Maser dagon chulunu. Of course you can. Why? Because C, item C on the list, which is the tithe, is not a sacrifice. Hence, not a problem. Yud Tesama Beis. Hani chalaman damar basar limeid azlinon. That's fine according to the opinion that says that the way that this rule is applied is you take a look at whatever item C is, the final item, and you say, I can go from A to B and then B to C because C is not a sacrifice. Elaman damar basar malamid azlinon. But if you're going to start with item A is a sacrifice. Right? A to B and then B to C. You can't go A to B and then continue on to C because A is a sacrifice. So then, how are you going to explain how you could do this? The answer is, because the answer is, the blood and the meat of the sacrifice are all one thing. It's not a hekesh. It's not that A teaches us about B. It's that A and B are both the same sacrifice. Just like you need the blood, you need the mizbeach, you need an altar in order to do the blood. That's part of the sacrifice. So too, the meat is also part of the sacrifice. It's all one thing. And then I'm just basically learning one step. I'm going AB over to C. Okay, next. Kodche kodshim. Next thing that you get lashes for, because you need more lashes in your life, Jeff.
What about the maser of grain?
So that's what we're ultimately learning too. Just like the sacrifice needs a Beis HaMikdash, so too the tithe of grain. In order to eat it in Jerusalem, you need to have a Beis HaMikdash in order to eat it.
But it's non-sacrificial.
And it's non-sacrificial. That's correct. And that's why we can make this. That's why we can learn this over. Okay. Kodche kodshim, the holy of holy objects. Right? You have to eat them inside the azara, inside the temple area. Tanina chadazim, and you cannot eat it while you're. Sorry, there's the issue here is that you cannot eat it while you are impure, in a status of impurity. So Tanina Chadazimna, we already had a Mishnah that taught us this rule. Meiser Sheni v'hektish shelo niftu. We said that when it comes to second tithes and things that are kot hektish that were not redeemed, right? So if you eat those things outside of Yerushalayim, you're going to get lashes. So Rabbi Yossi B'Rechanina says two different cases. Seifa b'maser sheni tahor v'gavra tahor. This last Mishnah is talking about a person who is not tamei. The meiser is not, the tithe is not tamei. You're just eating it outside of Yerushalayim. That's the prohibition that we're dealing with here. You're eating it outside the wall. That's the problem. Reisha, the Mishnah that we were learning before is b'meiser sheni tamei v'gavra tamei, is when the tithe became impure or the person who's eating it became impure. And a person who's impure or the tithe is impure and you eat it, then you are liable to lashes. Two different averos relating to tithes. But you happen to be reading it in Yerushalayim. So where do we know that this rule applies, that eating meiser, meaning this tithe in a status of tuma gets lashes? Tanya, we learn in Bryce, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shir says, Lo biarti mimenu hatame, that when comes year 3 and year 6, so you've gone through these mini cycles of taking all the tithes off. Because we said that you're always going to take off first tithe, you're going to take off the second tithe that you could see in your Yerushalayim, you're going to give your truma to the Kohen. Okay, that's what you have to bring in year 1. Do the same thing in year 2. But year 3, you do the first tithe, and then instead of bringing the second tithe, you're going to give a section of it to the poor people. Okay, so you wind up with a 3-year cycle. Year 1, year 2 the same, then year 3 to the poor people. Year 1, year 2, then year 3, year 4, year 5 the same, year 6 to the poor people. Every time you go through that mini cycle of 3 years, you go to the Beis HaMikdash and you make the declaration to the Kohen, I have you make sure you have nothing left in your house. You didn't store anything. You gave away all of your truma to the Kohanim. You gave away your meiser to the Leviim. You gave away all your stuff to the poor people. You took care of business. So you make this declaration: Lo biarti bimenu betame. Was not tummy when I ate it at all. Bein sha'ani tummy v'hu tahor. So the prohibition applies. This person's declaration is whether I was tamei and the tithe was tahor, bein shani tahor, or if I was tahor, v'hu tamei and the tithe was tamei. Either way, that would be a problem. Now, just that the person is making this declaration that I didn't do that, I didn't have a problem of tuma, indicates that there's some sort of a prohibition. But the question is, ve'echi muzhar al achila. So where is the prohibition against eating that while you are tamei? Eini yodea. So that I don't know. I don't know where that prohibition is. But tuma saguf behed yiksiv. But as far as the prohibition of being tamei yourself and eating the tahor tithe, that I do know where the pasuk is, because pasuk says nefesh asher tiga bo v'tamah. If you are a soul that touches it and you are tamei, then ad ha'erev you are v'tamah ad erev. The tumah lasts until nightfall. V'lo yochel min hakodshim, and you're not allowed to eat from the holy items. Right. So therefore, if you touch an impurity, then you become tamei to nightfall, and you can't eat any of the tithes or anything else that's kodesh.
Unless he has immersed his body in the water.
And then he's got to wait.
Is it a mikvah?
Yeah, he's got to go to a mikvah, but then he's got to wait. He's got to wait till nightfall, right? And that's he's got. He can't eat it right away. Elatumas atzmuinayin. What about if the item itself is tamei? Dichsiv, the pasuk says, lo tuchal lechol bisharecha. You are not allowed to eat it in your gates. Ulahal v'nomer, that it says bisharecha tochlenu hatamei v'hatahor. This pasuk is talking about a bechor offering that is blemished. So once a bechor offering has a blemish on it,
it's no longer kosher.
It's kosher.
But you can't offer it.
You can't offer it as correct, no longer a korban. That's right. So once it's got a blemish, then it's not a korban. Once it's not a sacrifice, you just eat it like a steak. And anybody can eat it. Well, the kohen, suppose he goes to the kohen, right? But he can eat it in any way he wants. He doesn't have to be tahor. When he eats it, he can eat it while he's tamei, because it's not a korban.
But if an animal has a wound or a blemish, are you not allowed to eat that or shop?
No, you can. As long as it's not a treifa, it has to be a non-life-threatening wound, right? If the animal has a scar on its ear, right, that's going to make it a blemish, and you can't bring it as a sacrifice, but it's going to be perfectly kosher, right? If it has a hole in its lung, then that is going to be something you can't eat, right? So that's going to be different.
I work with chickens.
That's right. I was going to say, you know your stuff.
I know chickens. I don't know cows, but I know chickens.
There you go. More than you need to know about the chickens. There you go. Okay. So now, so therefore, we see. So Vitanya, we learn in a brisa. Well, how are we going to connect? These two verses use a similar word, bisharecha, in your gates, to tell me that these rules are going to be compared. Tanya debei Rabbi Yishmael, we learn in a brisa of the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. Afilu tamei v'tahor ochim bekara achas. When it comes to the blemished bechor, right? So even if you've got two guys, one is pure, one is not pure, and they're sharing the same plate, that's okay. And what are you worried about? You're worried that the guy who is impure is going to touch this meat, make it impure. And now that the meat is impure, a pure person is eating the pure item.
At the same time, if you're eating it from the same plate and your fork touches the meat, which is impure, does that make the fork impure, makes you tummy?
Well, the fork would become the answer is yes. That's the short answer, yes. And that's the issue, right? The issue is one of these guys, right, the guy who was impure, was eating the pure meat. That's prohibition number one. Then he makes the meat impure, like you said, and now the pure guy is eating the impure meat. That would be number two. But the point is, you don't have to worry about either of those two things. That's the point of the pasuk. Since it's not an offering, there's no problem with it. Vein choshishin, we don't worry about that problem. V'kamar rachmana. So the Torah is telling us, heich tami deshari loch gabe tohar. So hasam gabe hasam. So therefore, just like over there, it does not matter whether the person is the impure thing or the meat is the impure thing. Either way, it's fine. Hacha here, when it comes to the tithe, lo techel, where it says don't eat it, so that's going to be both of those cases. Both whether the person is impure or whether the tithe is impure. Either way, that's going to be the avera, that's going to be the lo saseh, the prohibition against eating it. Now,
I have a question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
You're talking about someone being pure or impure.
Yes.
Give me an example of someone who's pure and someone who's impure.
Someone becomes impure because they're in the same room with a dead body. Right? Then in that circumstance, they're going to have to get the ashes of the paraduma sprinkled on them, right, of the red cow, in order to become purified again, right? Somebody gets tsaras, the leprosy, right? We had in last week's parsha, right? So in that circumstance, he had to, in order to become tar, he had to shave his body, and he has to go to the mikvah, right? Each one of these circumstances, the different types of impurity, have their own process of purification. Okay, so each one of those, that could be an that could be a circumstance where you're impure. Now, purification and purification doesn't really make that much of a practical difference until you're eating tithes, which is what we're discussing here, or it makes
Which only the Kohen eat, right?
No, because this was Meiser Sheni. This is the second tithe, which anybody eats, just they have to eat it in Yerushalayim.
Okay.
And that was what we were worried about. This person's eating the tithe. He himself is tamei, and his tithe, he can't eat it, right? Or let's say his tithe became tamei, then he can't eat it, even if he's tahor, right? So that's what we're discussing.
Okay.
Okay. Now, umi nolan debar pediyahu. Okay, so now we understand that we've got this concept, tithe that became impure cannot be eaten. Okay, now we know that. How do I know I can redeem it? In other words, now that I've got this impure, and it's in Yerushalayim. Normally, when it comes to the redeeming of these tithes, I can only redeem them when they are outside of Yerushalayim, right? Because the whole point is I have to be able to carry it to Yerushalayim, and it's going to be heavy, so therefore I can redeem it outside Yerushalayim. So how do I know? Now I've got this tithe inside Yerushalayim. Can I redeem this impure food inside Yerushalayim, and therefore make it not a tithe?
You cannot, because it's already impure. How can you eat something that's impure?
So you can't eat it while it's impure, right? But now I can redeem it. Now it's not a tithe anymore. Now the money is the tithe. And then I take the money and I buy something that is tahor. Okay? How do I know? And I can do that. How do I know? Rabbi Elazar says, how do I know that if I have second tithe produce that becomes tamei, that I can redeem it even if I'm in Yerushalayim?
The second tithe, you mean like second hand or?
The second tithe, right? Tithe 1, right? You give to the Levi. Second 10% that you take off is yours that you bring to Yerushalayim. That's the second tithe. Talmud lomar ki lo tuchal se'eso. You're not able to. The word se'eso is questionable what it means. Ve'en se'es elo achila. The word se'es could mean to carry, but in this case also could mean to eat. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, vayisamas os me'es panav, and the word se'ah in that context means to eat it.
Because here it says because you are unable
to
for shisai.
Right, se'eso, which means to eat it, right? Since you're unable to eat it. Why can't you eat it? Because it's tamei. Since you're unable to eat it, you can redeem it. And that's the rule. Amar Rav Bibi, Amar Rav Asi. Rav Bibi says in Rav Asi, Minayin l'maser sheni tahor shepodinoso afilu psia achas chutz lechoma. How do I know that if I've got the second tithe produce, that is tahor, right? Can't redeem it inside Yerushalayim, because now it's inside Yerushalayim, I got to eat it. What if it's even one step outside of Yerushalayim? I can redeem it. How do I know that? Shneimar, the pasuk says, "Kilo tuchal se'eso," because you cannot carry it into Yerushalayim. So therefore, as long as this tithe needs to be carried, I can redeem it. Okay, so therefore, two circumstances that we've learned that you can redeem your second tithe. One is if it's outside the walls of Yerushalayim. Number two, even if it's inside the walls of Yerushalayim, but it is tamei. Okay, so yeah, but Haimi Boilech Rabbi Eliezer, that we already used that pasuk. Kilo tuchal se'eso. According to Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer told us that it meant that you were able to redeem the tamei tithe, right? Because you weren't able to say se'eso means to eat it. Now you're saying se'eso means to carry it. So which is it? So imkei lemakrolo tuchal ochlo. If it meant Rabbi Eliezer's point, it would have said because you can't eat it. My se'eso. Why did it use the word se'eso? To carry it. So maybe se'eso means to carry it, and therefore it only means that I can only redeem it if it's outside the walls of Yerushalayim. So imkain, if that were true, lemakrolo tuchal litlo, then it would say you can't take it. My se'eso. Why does it use the word se'es? Shema minotarti. The word se'es has two meanings. It could mean to eat it, could mean to carry it, and therefore it's under either of these circumstances it can be redeemed. Yosef, Rav Chanina, Rav Hoshaya, v'kami boilu. Rav Chanina and Rav Hoshaya one time were sitting together, and they had the following question: Apischa di Yerushalayim mahu. Let's say this guy is standing right at the entrance of Yerushalayim. He's right there in the middle of the doorway. So what is the halacha there? So pshita, it would be obvious that hu bechotz umasao bifnim. Let's say he's carrying his suitcase, right? And his suitcase goes into the Yerushalayim first, and he's still outside. So that's clear and obvious. That we already understand. Once the produce is inside Yerushalayim, so then it's called tohu, then the walls have encompassed it, and now it's considered to be food that has gone into Yerushalayim. Okay? Then then it must be eaten in Yerushalayim. And even if you take it outside of Yerushalayim, we're going to learn the halacha is you cannot now redeem it, because once it was already in Yerushalayim, it now becomes Yerushalayim produce, and you cannot eat it outside Yerushalayim, and you cannot redeem it outside Yerushalayim, as we're going to see.
One-way street.
Once you're in, it's activated. That's basically, it's like it becomes activated meiser.
It gets redeemed. Oh, it gets redeemed as soon as you enter Yerushalayim?
No, you have to redeem it before you enter. Once you enter, now it's activated. Now you got to eat
What
it.
happens if like someone throws you like a fruit from outside?
And once it crosses over the border,
Then it becomes.
it's inside. Now it's inside.
Now then you have to redeem it.
Then you cannot redeem it inside. You can only redeem it before, right? Once it's inside, you got to eat it.
What would the person do if he
Then
got it inside?
Then he's got to eat it,
Oh,
right?
okay,
Now it's second time. Anybody can eat it.
Don't need Trumas Meiser if it was from the inside. Maybe it was thrown without the Trumas Meiser taken from that one portion.
This is Trumas Meiser, right? We're talking about they just have this orange.
Okay.
Is not Trumas Meiser, is Meiser Sheni, right? Not Trumas Meiser. That's the Kohen stuff. That's different. This is the Meiser. We're talking about Meiser Sheni. Okay, now. So hu bifnim umaso b'chutz mahu. What would be the halacha though if he's got it in a backpack? He walks in. His backpack is still outside. So Tana lahu hahusaba debei Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So a certain elder rabbi from the yeshiva Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said, "Ki yirchak mimcha hamakom." The place has Yerushalayim. It says, pasuk says, because the place is far away from you. Mimeluacha, from your entire body. Meaning, as long as some of you is in Yerushalayim, your produce is in Yerushalayim. If you're carrying a backpack and your produce is on your backpack, as soon as you walk into Yerushalayim, then you can't say, well, I can't eat it because I'm outside. No, the produce is considered inside because it's with you.
Once you walk in with your backpack with the produce is within the property.
That's correct. Okay, good. So that is now. Boy Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, let's ask the next question there. Nakit le bekanya my. Let's say you've got one of those sticks, like the cartoons where they got the stick hanging over the shoulder with the bag hanging off the back, right?
With the picnic bag. With
the little picnic bag in the back. Let's say that case. It's not on your body. It's just hanging off, right? It's like on a stick. What would be that case? So Teku, that's a good question. Okay, we don't have the answer to that one. Depends.
Right. I thought in the case of the tree,
Ask Looney Tunes or Walt Disney.
always go by the brand.
Remember that we said that was the case. That was the case when it comes to the Ir Miklat. But then we had the Mishnah in Meiser and said wherever the border is. And that's what caused our problem in the first place. Amar Ravasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ravasi says in Rabbi Yochanan, Meiser Sheni, Meimas HaChayav in Alav. At what point somebody is now in violation at what point is basically the Meiser Sheni become activated, right? That it becomes now Meiser Sheni. So Misha Ra'ah Pnei Achoma, once it goes into the base, once it goes into the walls of Yerushalayim. My time, what's the reason? Damar Kra, because the pasuk says, Lifnei Hashem Elokecha Tochlenu, you must eat it before Hashem. Uksiv, the pasuk says, Lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha, you're not allowed to eat it in your gates. Kol heicha dekarinam be'lifnei Hashem Elokecha Tochlenu. Right, any time that it says, right, that once the pasuk says that it becomes activated and it's now inside the walls of Hashem, so Karinam Bay, then that also activates the prohibition of Lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha. You cannot eat it when you're impure inside Yerushalayim.
Where it says you're allowed to eat it before Hashem, which means
inside Yerushalayim. So once you're allowed to eat it in Yerushalayim, you can no longer eat it and be tamei. Right? Once you are tamei, then you cannot eat it. The prohibition of eating it when you're tamei is not activated yet, right? Lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha is not activated yet, and therefore the lashes are only if you walked into Yerushalayim first. Okay, so that is what they say. Now,
so there's an Isser like by putting the fruits inside of the Yerushalayim from outside.
Sorry, say that again?
There's an Isser of putting fruits from outside Yerushalayim inside?
No. There's a prohibition against eating your maaser outside of the walls of Yerushalayim. Prohibition of eating maaser that's tamei, right? There's a prohibition against eating being tamei and eating your maaser inside the walls of Yerushalayim. So that's where all these different prohibitions come in. Okay, but once this prohibition is once it's activated and once you've gone into the walls of Yerushalayim and you go back out. So that's the prohibition of lo tuchol lechol. Then you cannot eat it. That's this prohibition. So therefore, the prohibition is once I go in, I cannot go back out and eat it.
No re-entry.
Correct. Right. Well, no re-exit really. Right? Because if you do exit, you need to bring it back in and eat it.
Right.
And you can't redeem it once it's gone in either. Like now, once that's what he's saying. Once you get to the point of lifnei Hashem lokecha tochlenu, once this becomes produce that needs to be eaten in front of Hashem, so then lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha, you're not allowed to then take it out and eat it outside in your faraway places. You can't eat it there. Okay, so that's where that comes from. Now,
this is when we have a base of Migdash.
When we have a base, as we said, all when we have a base of
Not
Migdash.
pertaining to us at this time.
Correct.
now.
There's no obligations of Meiser Sheni at all anymore. Correct.
We're preparing for when we have the basement.
That's correct.
We'll know the laws.
That'll be when the Mashiach comes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, Meisvei Rabbi Yossi Omer. Rabbi Yossi says, Kohen also biyodo te'ena shel tevel. Let's say a Kohen, and this works in modern times too, because there are tithe obligations in modern times as well. Right? You go to Eretz Yisrael and you get produce that's grown in Eretz Yisrael. You have to take off the tithe portions, right?
Really?
You have to give them. Yeah, you got to give them to a Kohen, give them to a Levi. The problem is you don't know who's a Kohen, who's a Levi. So we don't do it. So therefore, we take it, we remove a portion of it, and we let it. We set it aside, right?
Now we have a Kohen giving us a class, so we can give it to you
So
easily.
yes, except that I have to be able to bring a proof to you to be able to get it. So now, here's what happens. Rabbi Yossi says, let's say a Kohen, right? He picks up a fig. He takes up a teina, a fig. And the fig is tevel. It hasn't had any portions taken off of it. And he makes the following declaration. He makes a declaration. Amar, he says, teina zu trumasa be... There we go. Illustration. We need illustration.
That was right.
Jumped out of
that chair.
I need illustration. This one is. Okay, that's right. 1 second. Fig. Okay. Here's my fig. Okay. Okay. This is my fig. Okay. Kohen says the part, right? He says teinazu trumasoba oktsa. Right around here, right by this stem, that's going to be my truma. Okay. This is my truma.
Which is?
That goes to the Kohen.
Okay.
Okay. Now remember, he is a Kohen. Okay. So that goes to the truma, but he can't eat it because it's tevel. Once it's mixed in together, he can't eat it because that's tevel. Can't eat mixed, but now it's separated out. Now this is truma. The rest is not truma. Okay. Then he says, Maaser Rishon Bitzfona, the northern section, 10%. This is going to be my Maaser Rishon, my first tithe. Okay.
That goes to the Kohen.
That goes to the Levi.
Oh, to the Levi, right.
Right? And then the Levi is going to take a portion of it and give it to a Kohen also.
So the Kohen's going to get the stem.
Now, Umaiser Sheni, Lidroma. Then he says, this little bottom 10%, that's going to be my Meiser Sheni. Okay? That's going to be the part that I got to eat in Yerushalayim.
Okay.
Okay? So now, Vushnas Meiser Sheni, V'hu Yerushalayim. Now this Kohen, happens to be one of the years that you eat Meiser Sheni, and he's in Yerushalayim. So he's all set up. So let's see. O Meiser Ani, V'hu Begvulin, right? Or it could be a year where it's Meiser Ani, it's this poor person's tithe, and he could be outside of Eretz Yisrael. So now what happens? Achla, if he eats this fig, okay? Loke achas, he has violated one prohibition. Which prohibition? Well, Truma is not a problem. It's not tevel anymore because he separated it all out. You don't have to cut it into pieces. He just designated it, right? But the Truma he's allowed to eat. The Meiser Sheni he's allowed to eat. The problem is the Meiser Rishon has to go to the Meiser Rishon has to go to a Levi, and then the Levi has to take off the Truma and give it back to him. He didn't do that. So therefore what he's done is he's eaten Meiser Rishon that has not had Trumas Maser taken off of it.
Of course, you get lashes for that?
Yes. So he's Loka Achas. He's going to get lashes for that. Okay? Now, Vizar She'achla, if he's a non-Kohen who does the same thing, Loka Shtayim, he's going to get 2 sets of lashes. Right? Because, why? Because he's eating Truma. He has no right to eat. So now he's eating Truma, he's going to get a 2nd set of lashes. Now, just to point out, Shilu B'tchila Achla, if he would have just eaten this and not done anything, then the whole thing would have been Tevel, and Eino Lo Kelachas, he'd only gotten 1 set of lashes. Right? He made it worse for himself, because now, by separating it out, he's now got a Truma problem, he's got a Meiser Rishon without the Truma Gdol problem, Before he only had a tevel problem, so he was better off before that.
The Meiser Rishon part, if it's off topic, then say so. But if he's having the Meiser Rishon part, the 90% of that belongs to the
Levi, right?
Can he eat that though?
So that if he eats it, right, he's stealing.
Yeah.
Right? First of all, you have to remember that as a Kohen, he is also a Levi. During the times of the second base of Mikdash, they were able to eat, the Kohanim were eating that as well.
Because
right?
Aaron was a Levi before Hashem.
Right? So the answer is, it's not as bad. Right? But at worst, there's a difference between a financial penalty problem, in which case he'd have to pay back the Levi, right? And then versus a actual Isser problem, right? To eat if a person eats
eating the untithed thing,
that would be the problem, and that would be a tevel and losa, so you get Makkos for that.
What's an Isser again?
Prohibition.
Thank you.
Tama de Isay B'Yerushalayim. The problem is that he's in the reason why this happens, he's only getting one, is because he's in Yerushalayim. Ha bigvulin. If this guy wasn't in Yerushalayim, so what would we say? Then it would be shalosh. The guy would get a third set of lashes. Why? He's eating his second tithe outside of the walls of Yerushalayim. Yeah, but daf agav de lav roa pnei choma. So why should that be? This truma, this meiser we just said has to be activated in order to violate the prohibition. It has to go into the walls of Yerushalayim in order to get activated, and this didn't get activated. So the answer is de I leave it apke. What happens is that he brought this fig into Yerushalayim, and then they brought it back out of Yerushalayim. Well, Hachi Maila Memra. So then what's the point of this case? If the point is that you're telling me that we sorted it all out and then brought it into Yerushalayim and brought it back out of the Yerushalayim, obviously he's going to get lashes for violating the second tithe prohibition. That we already know. So Hachi B'Mayaskina, what are we dealing with here? Could go Dailinhu B'Tivlaihu. What he did was he brought this fig into Yerushalayim before he separated anything out. It wasn't Meiser Sheni. So therefore, the question is, v'kasaver matnos shelohumru kemushahumru damyon. Is this second tithe, before he makes this declaration, is it there? Is there a second tithe here? Not really. It's tevel, it's not second tithe yet. So this opinion says tevel, untithed. So this opinion says, even though it's not second tithe yet, since it's destined to become second tithe, it's considered second tithe, thereby it can be activated inside the walls of Yerushalayim, and when he walks out and then actually tithes it outside the walls of Yerushalayim, he becomes in violation of the prohibition.
Even if you take it out of Yerushalayim, aren't you supposed to still give Truma because it was a product of Israel?
Meiser Sheni, right? We're talking about Meiser Sheni. The Meiser Sheni has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. The rest of it has to be given to other people, but it doesn't have to be eaten in Yerushalayim. The Meiser Sheni is the part that we're worried about. The suburb Rabbi Yossi is saying, Matanos shelohurmu k'moshe hurmu dami. Now what Rabbi Yossi is saying, what you're suggesting is, does Rabbi Yossi really hold that? That even though the item hasn't been separated out, it's considered as though it has been separated out. V'atanya, we're in a brisa. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says, Mishum Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi, Lo nechleku beis Shammai beis Hillel al perisha lo nigmara malachton ve'avru b'Yerushalayim sheyipodeh. Meiser Sheni Shalahen v'yochal b'kol makom. Okay, he says that there is no argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in a circumstance where, let's say, I have some wheat, and I have not completed the processing of this wheat. Okay, it's not made into kernels yet. All that it is I've got, it's in the husk or whatever it is that's not completely done yet. So let's say he transports this wheat into the walls of Yerushalayim. So now, then they take it back. Then he leaves, taking his wheat with him outside of Yerushalayim. So he says, in that circumstance, nobody thinks that when he later on makes it Meiser Sheni, that the Meiser Sheni is activated. Because at the time that it was in Yerushalayim, it wasn't wheat that was ready to be activated yet. So therefore...
Once the husk opens up, and the wheat starting to come out slowly...
No. It's got to be all processed. Got to be winnowed, and it's got to be completely all processed so that it becomes ready to be smoothed and everything. So what's the argument? The argument is when you had fully finished flour, right? And they walk into Yerushalayim with it. Beis Shammai says, Yachzir Meiser Sheni Shalahem v'yochal b'Yerushalayim. If you then took this out of Yerushalayim, you've got to go back into Yerushalayim and you've got to eat it in Yerushalayim because you've activated it. Beis Hillel Omrim, Beis Hillel says, Yipadeh v'yochel b'kol makom. You can even though you had not designated as Meiser Sheni yet, once it leaves Yerushalayim, it can be at that point, and you designate it as Meiser Sheni, you could then redeem it, because not in Yerushalayim at that time, you can redeem it and then eat it in any place. Now, if you're of this opinion that Rabbi Yossi was holding, if you think that Rabbi Yossi holds that once he walked in with this fig into Yerushalayim, then even though it didn't have the second tithe taken off, it's as though the second tithe was taken off. So mechitzos. So then once this wheat went into, even though it wasn't processed yet, once it went into the walls of Yerushalayim, he should be agreeing, Beis Hillel should be saying that when he comes back out, it's now going to be unable to be redeemed. It needs to be brought back in and eaten in Yerushalayim. So Rabbi explains, Mechitza le'echol de'oraisa, Mechitza liklot de'rabanan. There's two different things here. The wall of Yerushalayim, if it goes in, once it goes out of Yerushalayim, so as far as making a prohibition against eating it outside of Yerushalayim, that is a Torah prohibition. And hence, even if it wasn't separated yet, it becomes prohibited if it becomes separated later to be eaten outside of Yerushalayim. That's true. However, as far as the walls encompassing this produce so that you cannot redeem it anymore, that's only a rabbinic enactment. From the Torah's perspective, even though you can't eat it outside, you could redeem it. But then the rabbi said, once you can't eat it, we also don't allow you to redeem it. We make you go bring it back into Yerushalayim. And so then, since it's only a rabbinic law, the rabbinic law only applies once it was already separated out, not before. So betivle, lo gozer rabbanon. When it was before it was separated out, the rabbinic enactment preventing you was not in place. So therefore, this problem of being unable to redeem is only a problem for the redemption, is not a problem with the redemption because it's only a rabbinic law. It becomes a Torah law that you cannot eat it outside. And that's why Rav Yossi seems to say two different things, but it's because he's talking about two different actions. Ravina says, Kagon to knocket le bekanya v'tifshot baya de Rav Papa. So Ravina says, that he actually brought it into Yerushalayim, and this is the circumstance where he brought it in on the stick, like we had asked before the last time when it was hanging on the stick. So therefore the question is it as though he went in or whether he didn't go in? And so this is the answer to Rav Papa's question that we asked on Yud Tasamid Beis just before, was it considered in or it's considered not in? So he says, then he says that it's just the same way. You're not allowed to redeem it, and you must eat it inside Yerushalayim, because he's answering the question that Rav Papa had raised before. Okay, so that is next section. Okay, if you had enough of tithes. Okay, we're 10% over our limit on tithes. Oh, yeah. Let's change topics. Let's change topics. That's the Mishnah.
Let's talk about the head now.
It's a good idea. Let's talk about the head. Hakorech karcha barosho. Okay, somebody is in mourning. Okay, and so he's in mourning, and they would have a custom, the non-Jews, that they would pull their hair out of mourning, right? So doing that is prohibited. Lo saseh, you get lashes for that. V'makif pa'as rosho. Also, if you shave the corners of your head, right? Shaving your pa'as, you get lashes for it. V'hamashchis pa'as zikno, somebody who destroys the corners of his beard, right? Also is a prohibition. V'asoret srita achas alames chayev. If he makes a cut, if he cuts himself in mourning as a sign of mourning for somebody who died, then he is chayev. Soret srita achas al chamesha mesim. Let's say this fellow has 5 people who died, and he cuts himself once in order to mourn for 5 people. Oh, chamesh sritos al mes echad, or he cuts himself 5 times in mourning for this one dead person. Chayev al kol achas v'achas. He's going to be liable for every one of those. He's going to get 5 sets of lashes. Right? Al harosh shtayim. There are 2 cut. If somebody shaves the corners of his head, you're going to be liable for 2. Achas mikan v'achas mikan. 1 from one side of your head and 1 from the other side of your head. V'al zokein shtay mikan u'shtay mikan. For the beard, 2 on each side of your face, and where those 2 are, it's going to be subject to machlokas. We'll discuss machlokas rishonim. It's going to be 2 on each side of your face, the achas milmata, and 1 on the bottom. Rabbi Eliezer says, Im nitlu kulan ka'achas, if you shave your entire beard all at once, eno chayav ela achas, you're only liable once. Ve'eno chayav ad sheyitlenu b'tar, and you're only in violation if you shave using a razor. Rabbi Eliezer says, Afilu lakto b'malaket o b'ritni chayav. Rabbi Eliezer says, even if you cut it close with a plane, which we'll see what a plane is. Plane is basically is like a tool they use to smooth wood out with, right? A planing tool.
Shave wood.
That's correct. So if you use that to shave your face, right? So even that was the question.
Do that.
I was saying, okay. Some people are desperate for a clean shave. Or with the scissors, so he says that you're liable if you cut it too close. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabban Rabbi, lo yikruchu. You're not allowed to make a bald spot. That's what the pasuk says. Yachol afil karach arba v'chamesh krichos lo yechayev elachas. I might think that if I make 4 or 5 bald spots, I'm only liable once. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, karcha, right? Lo yikrichu karcha, double language, to tell me lechayev al kol karcha v'karcha. Every bald spot that the person makes is a separate prohibition, and he's getting lashes for every single one. Berosham has to be in your head. Ma Talmud Lomar means it's why do I have to have that there? The fish never, because the pasuk says lo tisgodedu. Velo tasimu karcha beinei nechem lemes. It says, you shall not cut yourself, and you shall not make a bald spot between your eyes, in a different passage. So now, yachol lo yechayev ela al bein einayim bilvad, I might think that it means that you're only liable if you cut right between your eyes. Like you do like a cut right here, you make yourself bald right here. Minayin l'rabos kol harosh. How do I know to include the prohibition any place on the head? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, birosham, on your head, meaning it can be any place. L'rabos kol harosh, to tell me that the prohibition against making a bald spot is anywhere in your head. Ve'emli ela b'kohanim. Now, that prohibition against making a bald spot on your head is written in the parsha from last week, where Aaron's 2 sons died, and Aaron is told, don't show any signs of mourning, don't make any bald spots on your head. That's a non-Jewish way of mourning.
They wanted the Kodesh without permission.
They made a strange fire, right? So now, this only applies to the Kohanim, Sheriba b'henakos of mitzvahs yiseros, and I might think maybe that's just a rule by Kohanim. Right? They can't make any bald spot anywhere in their head because they've got lots of extra mitzvos, those Kohanim. So maybe it's different. Maybe they have a stricter prohibition against bald spots. Yisrael minayin, how do I know that rule about your entire head applies to regular Jews also? Nemar karn karcha v'nemar lahagim karcha. It's a gzera shava. It says the word karcha by the Kohen. It says the word karcha by the regular Jew. Ma'alaholan chayav al kol karcha v'karcha v'chayav al harosh kebein hainayim. Just like the Kohen, he's liable for every single one of the cuts, one of these places, and all over his entire head. Afkan, so too the regular Jew, chayav al kol karcha v'karcha v'chayav al harosh kebein hainayim. He's going to be liable for every bald spot, and also he's going to be liable for every part of his head. Umala halan al mace. Now, just like we learned that this is about a dead person, afkan al hames. So too, the prohibition against making a bald spot is specifically in mourning for somebody who died. So hani dalid vehei krichos hechidami. So, what is the circuit? How do you wind up cutting bald spots in your head and getting 4 or 5 sets of lashes? So, if what happened was he did it 5 separate times and somebody warned him 5 times, so then pshita, that's a pretty obvious case, right? Don't do that. You did it. Okay, now it's 1. Now don't do that. I did it again. So okay, so every time I'm doing a separate aveira, so I can understand it. So pshita, so that's obvious. Ella bechada hasra. So he says, rather, you have one warning. He got 1 warning and he made 5 cuts. So me mechayev, would you be liable 5 times then if you only got warned once? That's none. Didn't wear on Chaf Amud Beis 20b at the top. That's not, but didn't we learn in a Mishnah? Nazir shaya shosa yayin kol yom. Let's say there's a Nazir. A Nazir promises that he's not going to drink any wine, he's not going to come in contact with the dead. Let's say he drinks wine all day long. Eino chayav elachas. He's only going to get liable for 1 set of lashes, right? Because he only got warned at 1 time. They said, don't drink wine, and he keeps drinking all day. He gets 1 set of lashes.
You should probably go to AA as well.
Also, it's also true. Amru lo al tishtaf. They kept telling him all day long, don't drink. V'hu shoseh, and he drinks. So then he's chayav kol achas v'achas. Then he's going to be liable for all of them. So therefore, I don't understand what happened with this guy that he's going to get 5 sets of lashes for cutting 5 parts. If he only got 1 warning, he should only be liable for 1. So lo tzricha desach chamesh etzbaos nasa ve'osvinhu babas achas. What happens is he puts whatever kind of cream on his fingers in order to remove the hair on his 5 fingers, and he puts them through his hair at one time. So therefore, and by doing that, he's been warned, and he's done 5 actions simultaneously. So therefore, that's how he did 5 actions with 1 warning.
He'll be chayav still.
He's be chayav 5 times. The kamashir korcha. What is the amount of bald spot that makes it liable? So Rav Huna says, Kadei shigira me rosho, so that it is seen from your head. Now, it's questionable what that means. Does that mean that it has to be so close that if you look really up close, as soon as you see any bald spot, you're liable? That's one way of looking at it, a very strict way of looking at it. Another way, other Rishonim read this Gemara as saying that you have to be standing far away and the bald spot has to be visible, which is a little bit more of a more stringent way of looking at it. Rabbi Yochanan says, Mishum Rabbi Elazar, but Rabbi Shimon, kegris, the size of a bean. Right, it has to be the size of a bean. And others say kedishiyira meirosho. Others say that it has to be visible from his head. So I'm sorry. This is like a machlokas tanayim ketanai kamashir karcha kegris. We said it's like the size of a gris. And
Gris is a bean.
A bean, right? And others say, in order to be able to see it from your head. And Rabbi Yehuda bar Chaviva, and Rabbi Yehuda bar Chaviva says, pligi ba. We toss it tonight. There's 3 opinions on this. Chad Amar Kagris, one says the bean size, Vechad Amar Kadeshir Mirocho, so that it's visible from your head. Vechad Amar Kishtei Saros, and the other says 2 hairs. Got 2 hairs, and that's considered a balding. Ve'eka demapik Shtei Saros. Some people say that 2 hairs is not an opinion. Uma'ayo Beka'adosha, and say it's a barley, a size of a barley. Vesimanech. Beheres kegris umichya bekadosha. The way that you can remember it is that the Mishnah tells you, when talking about the afflictions, which are in this week's parsha, right, that in order to be able to have a certain type of a blemish, you need to have the blemish with a piece of live flesh in the middle of it. So if your whole blemish is the size of a bean and the live flesh inside is a piece of a barley, which is inside of it, then that's going to be considered saras. But that's going to remind you of beans and barley, which is going to be the size of your balding here. Tana, we learned, no hanota malo piazug b'Shabbos chayev. If somebody cuts the hair, the amount of hairs that would fit into the tip of a scissors on Shabbos, he's liable for sheep shearing. Right, shearing sheep is prohibited, and so too cutting any hair on a person is liable for the same prohibition on Shabbos. V'kama malo pliazug. How much is the amount for a scissors? Amar Rav Yehuda shtayim 2 hairs. Right, cut 2 hairs. V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa lekorcha shtayim that when it comes to balding, that's going to be 2. So ema v'chein. So therefore, it says that sounds like that is a rule by balding, not the rule by Shabbos. So the answer is ve'ema v'chein lekarcha. So no, you should say similarly, meaning the 2 laws are the same. Just like the one who has the opinion that you get 2 hairs by balding, so too it's similar to Shabbos. Okay, it's going to be 2. Tanya nami yachiv, a brisa that supports that view. Hanotum malei piazug b'Shabbos. If somebody takes 2 hairs, takes the amount of a scissors full of hairs on Shabbos, he's chayev v'kam malo piazug. How much is a scissor full? Shtayim 2 hairs. Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Eliezer says, Achas, 1 hair. Umodim chachamim Rabbi Eliezer, and the chachamim agree with Rabbi Eliezer, but malaket levanos, that if you are trying to pluck out your white hairs, mitoch shchoros, from your black hairs, afilu achas, even 1 is considered significant, because then you're doing it for a purpose, right? Your purpose is to remove that hair, and you're trying to pluck your white hair out. That is going to be, your prohibition immediately. Shulchayev is going to be liable. The davar zeh, and by the way, that's not just a Shabbos prohibition. Afilu b'chol aser, that's even prohibited during a weekday. Mishum shenemar, because the pasuk says, "Lo yibash gever simlos isha." Person should not dress like a woman. This idea of needing to dye your hair and look young, that's a ladies' thing, right? So guys, don't worry about that. So therefore, don't worry about it. Vamakif pas rosh. It's okay if we go till 9:40, just because I started 10 minutes late, so I apologize.
No, we're good. The more we do now, the better we are.
Yeah.
V'hamakif pas rosho. So now, if somebody is going to round off the corners of his head, Tana Rabbanon, our rabbis learn pas rosho, the corners of his head. Sof rosho, it's the end of his head. V'ezu sof rosho, what's the portion of your body is the end of your head? Zehamashvet da'ov la'achorei ozno ulepadachto. That's somebody who makes a line from the back of his ear to his forehead. This rounds this whole section straight up, right? Cut that off, then you're in violation. Now then, we then have further explanations that it applies to even sideburns and any place up until the bone, so we don't cut any of the hair in this whole side region here. Once it gets too short, then that would be the prohibition. Tani Tana Kame de Rav Chisda. So we learn the following in front of Rav Chisda. Echad hamakiv echad hanikef loka. The guy who gets the haircut and the guy who gives the haircut both get Makkos for this. Right? So if you're sitting in the barber chair, of course, you're going to get Makkos because they cut off your payas. And if you're the barber and the guy says, give me a trim and cut this off, you're also going to get Makkos.
The problem is, what happens if you told the barber not to cut certain parts, and he cuts it?
Then it's not your fault. Then you took the action, right? Right? But if not.
Barber would get Makkos though?
Yes. That's what he says. The barber gets Makkos.
I'm saying if the person doesn't himself.
That's correct. If the person says no, right, he gets Makkos, then the barber gets Makkos. Amar le manda achol tamri bar bila lucky. He says, I don't understand. The guy sitting in the barber chair, what did he do? A guy sitting and eating a basket of figs is going to get Makkos. He didn't do anything. He's sitting in the barber chair. He didn't, lav shem b'maisa at best, right? You can't, but he didn't do anything. So the answer is, Da'amar lach mani. He says, I'll tell you who it is. It's Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda. Da'amar lav shem b'maisa lo ken alav. It's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion who says that even though there's no action, you can get Makkos for it.
Right? Under the bus.
Rava says, b'makif la'atzmo. The guy is helping, right? He keeps moving his head closer to help the barber make it so that he's moved by moving around. Then that is the action. V'divrei hakol. And that's according to everybody. And Ravash Yomer, sorry, that's not that one. He says b'makif la'atzmo, when the guy's doing his own haircut, right? When he's doing his own haircut, right? So therefore, if he cuts it himself, he's going to get 2 sets of lashes. One for cutting it and one for having it cut. Then he gets 2 sets of lashes. And Ravashi is the one who says b'masayeya, where he's helping the barber do it. Then he's getting his lashes v'divrei kol kohen everybody. Next, hamashchis pa'as zikno. Somebody destroys the corners of his beard. Tana Rabbanon, pa'as zikno, sof zikno. The corners of his beard, that is the ends of his beard. That is the ends of his beard. Vezu sof zikno. So what is the end of his beard? Shibolis zikno, the points of his beard. What are the points of the beard? Good question. So, argument between multiple positions and opinions here, right? I'm going to draw crudely here. This is going to be, right, person here. Okay. We can sort of tell what we're drawing here. This is his ear. Okay. Good. That's pretty decent. Okay. Okay. So here he has, according to one opinion, the Rivan, 0.1, 0.2, and then on the other side 2 points, and then 0.3 on the tip of its chin. Right. So that's going to be our 5 points. According to Rabbi Hananel, he says 0.1 is up here. Right. 0.2 is going to be here, by the corner of the mustache, and 0.3 is down here. Okay? If you're going to hold according to Rashi and Shvuas, so Rashi and Shvuas says 0.1 is over here, 0.2 is over here, where his cheekbone is, and 0.3 is down here. Bottom line, there's so many opinions as to where it is. Don't cut any of your beard with a razor. Right? So that's it. Here, they're all. You're going to run into an opinion.
How do people shave now?
Savik doraisa. The only way for people, right? The only way for people to shave, right, is you're going to need scissors, right? You only have to be able to use. You have to be able to use not erasers. We're going to see in a moment, right? Can't be the razor. Okay. Hamasarit srita achas. Okay. Then now somebody is not allowed to make a wound. Right, so if he does it one time, so he's going to get, for 5 different dead people, he's going to get 5. Tanarbana, Visarit, somebody says in the Pasuk, Visarit, if he makes a cut, Yachaf Visarit al Beso. Let's say, you might have thought, you're not allowed to make a wound on yourself, so that means even if the guy is sad about his house falling down, al Sfina Soshitov, or his ship sank, right, Bayam in the sea, Tamad Lomar Lenefesh. Therefore it says, no, it's only a matter of mourning that's a problem. Mourning for a dead person. Eno Chayev El Al Meis Bilvad, only for mourning. How do I know that you'd be liable 5 times for the one person who died if you make, for one cut if you did it for 5 people, because Visarat, l'chayva kol srita srita. It says Visarat, he cuts every one of his cuts. Right, this means that if he's cutting many cuts for one dead person, every single cut is its own avera. Rabbi Yossi says, how do I know? Let's say he makes one cut for 5 people. He said also going to be liable for 5. That he's going to be liable for each one of the dead people. The pasuk says lenefesh. It's based on the souls. And since you did for 5 different souls, it's 5 different averos. L'chayvo kel nefesh v'nefesh. You're going to be liable for every soul that you cut for. So either it's every cut or it's every soul. And then you can look at it either side.
5 cuts. So get your money.
So, two things. Number one, every time I shave, I'm,
With a razor,
well, what else would I shave with?
an electric razor.
Oh, I have,
Cause
not talking
a
an
beard
electric
trimmer,
razor.
right? Right, beard trimmer.
And-
Not as an issue, right? I would. This is a good Shabbos here, right?
Yeah,
we can get into get into the halachos of shaving and things. But I would say that the issue of cutting with a scissor is that you still cannot cut, as we're going to see in a moment. That a mashchis is going to be. I don't want to get into it because we're going to get into it on the next page a little bit. What you
Why
can
would
cut
someone
with.
themselves if they're mourning?
That's like
Practice.
that was yeah.
We used to do this?
No.
We didn't. We didn't. Right? It's prohibited for us to do it. The non-Jews did it. Right?
Oh, the non-Jews.
Yes, that's custom. Right? So we can't do that.
You don't want to
Well,
emulate
he's saying,
their
he's saying
behavior.
if you do cut yourself, then it's this, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. Saying
So if you haven't been doing that, that's good. Keep that up.
Yeah. No cutting. No cutting.
I get the odd little.
And that's not the shaving part. This
Right.
is shaving. That was two different averos, right? We were talking about shaving.
Right.
Now we're talking about cutting for morning. You were getting the coffee. We moved on to morning.
Sorry, guys.
I don't want to come back and he's like, oh, if I cut myself shaving, I'm getting lashes. Right. Okay. So now, right? You already said the word nefesh was telling me that I don't get lashes if I cut myself for another reason, like I'm sad that my house fell down or that my boat sank. So, kasav Rabbi Yossi, srita ugedida achasi. Rabbi Yossi is holding that the concept of srita and gedida are the same thing. There's no difference, but it says in the Torah, you're not allowed to make a srita and you're not allowed to make a gedida. Both cut. Okay, so they're identical things. Uksiv hasam lemes, right? And it says over there, by each of them, you can't do it for a dead person. So therefore, it says you can't make a gedida for a dead person, and the nefesh is therefore telling me that I'm going to get malchus for every single dead person I do it for. Amar Shmuel says masarit bekli chayev. If somebody makes a cut masarit with a utensil, you're liable. We're going to see that usually the word masarit means to make a cut is talking to cut without a utensil, to make a cut like to scratch. Right? Meisvei, but we asked the fine question. Srita ugedida achasi. We just said Rabbi Yossi holds that srita, which means to cut without a weapon, and gedida, which means to cut with a knife. But he says they're the same thing. Ella srita biyad. The difference is that srita is by hand, ugedida bekli, and gedida is with a utensil. So the answer is Huda Amar Rabbi Yossi. He holds like Rabbi Yossi, who says that they are identical things. Both of them are with a utensil. Without a utensil, it makes no difference.
Same prohibition.
Right, same thing. Tani Tana, Kami Rabbi Yochanan. We learned the following in the name of Rabbi. They taught the following for Rabbi Yochanan. Al mace, when it comes to a dead person, bein biyad, bein bekli chayev. It doesn't matter whether you use utensil, you don't. You're going to be liable. Al avodas kochavim, when you're doing it for idol worship, biyad chayev. If you do it by hand, then you're liable bekli pater. So then it would be with a utensil, it would be exempt. But why would you say that? The opposite is written in the pasuk. The pasuk by idolatry says, "Vayis go to do kamishpatam." You make a cut using the word gedud, which is with a blade, like their laws, becharvos b'ramachim, with their swords or with their spears. Ela ema biyad pater b'kli chayev. Therefore, for idolatry, by hand is exempt, but with a utensil is going to be liable. Then we say v'chayav harosh, you are liable for the head. So mechvi Rav Sheshes bein pirkei reisha. Rav Sheshes showed where the corners of your head was, so that people knew where not to shave their payas off. V'alazakein shtayim mikan. The places on the beard, as we said, were two, one on each side of the cheeks, right? Umikan and one on the bottom. V'achtzmimata. Mechvi Rav Sheshes bein pirkei dikna, and Rav Sheshes showed the places on his beard. Rav Eliezer says im not lon. Rabbi Eliezer says that if you took them off, so ksavar chad lavhu. He says if you shave your whole head, it's all one prohibition, right? The whole thing is one prohibition. That was his position. And the other side said if you shave your beard, it's going to be 5, as we said before. You're only liable if you shave with a razor. The pasuk says that with the corner of your beard you shall not shave. I might think that includes the scissors. You'd be liable. It says do not destroy. Destroy means to uproot the hair completely. If it means to destroy, so im lakto b'malaket verehitni yechayev. If I used a plane or some other tool to pluck it out, some say it means a tweezers or something like that, to pluck the hair out, you might think I'm liable. Tamalomar, the pasuk says, "V'lo yigalechu," you shall not shave. So ha ketzad, It needs to be, how do you combine these two psukim? One says that it has to be with a specific utensil. One says that it has to be a shave. So the answer is, giluach sheyesh bo hashchasa. It has to be a shaving, which is completely destroying the hair, uprooting it. So Haviomer Zitar, which means a razor. Otherwise, using a scissor and cutting with a little bit left, trimming your beard wouldn't be a problem. And if you are uprooting it, but with a tool that is not regularly used for shaving, would not be a problem. Rabbi Eliezer disagreed. He said even if you use the planing tool, and you are liable. Manavshach, he says like this: Igmir gzera shava liboitar. If he learns this gzera shava, so then he should need the razor. Ilo gamer gzera shava. If he says that he doesn't learn the gzera shava, misparaim nami lo. So then why would a scissor? Then he shouldn't be allowed to use a scissor either, right? Why is he saying that? That they should never be allowed to cut it in any way. So the answer is liolam gemir gzera shava. He does learn the gzera shava. The kasavar hani nami giluach avdi. He holds that these planes are also considered utensils, even though they're not normally the normal utensils that you would use to shave with. Nevertheless, they accomplish the job. And at the end of the day, since they accomplish the job, that makes it prohibited. Okay, we'll stop there at the Mishnah.
Beautiful.
New guys, beer and pastime.
We're into the